Hi, this is Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul's Missionary Baptist Church located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Also the founder of the 2019 movement, and I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. Malcolm X had a very famous quote. His quote was, "The media's most powerful entity on the earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and make the guilty innocent, and that's power because they control the minds of the masses." Now, of course, we know that Malcolm X was assassinated in the 1960s, and if he believed that the media was powerful then, I can only imagine what he would think about the media now. Now, there's a couple of things I want to talk to you very briefly about, and especially in regards to the African American community. You know, when we look at this political time that we're in, and it's going to be very interesting. And so a couple of things I want to talk to you about. You know, the powers that be, like I said, they've been studying the human condition for a long time. As a matter of fact, when they studied psychology back in the after the Enlightenment period and moving forward, they began to study it not from a standpoint of just understanding how the human brain works, but how to manipulate the masses. And so they came up with one concept that they coined a phrase called groupthink. Groupthink is the practice of thinking or making decisions as a group in a way that discourages creativity or individual responsibility. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony or conformity in the group results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. Now, let me talk to you about groupthink and how that has been used to manipulate the African American community. It's being used for the public as a whole, but there's differences. Like, for instance, if you look at white America, for the most part, from a political standpoint, is split 50-50. If you look at most elections, Democrat versus Republican in the national elections, for the most part, the numbers are very close to 50-50. Now, when you look in the African American community, up until this last election cycle, it was probably about 90% plus of African Americans voted the same way, and it was all Democrat. Now, you got to realize that this phenomenon is not by coincidence, is not by chance, that there has been a lot of work done to socially engineer and to manipulate the minds of African Americans. And so I want to talk to you about that briefly. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, that's conspiracy, et cetera, et cetera." When you think about the African American community and how diverse it is, it only makes sense that that you would see and understand that it's not by chance that African Americans vote at a 90+% clip Democrats. Now, so let me talk about a couple different terms, and then we'll get to the heart of what we're talking about, right? So there's a thing called identity politics, and identity politics sometimes referred to as identinism. It's a political approach and analysis based on people prioritizing the concerns most relevant to their particular racial, religious, ethnic, sexual, social, cultural, or other identity, and forming exclusive political alliances with others of this group. Instead of engaging in a more traditional, broad-based political ideology, those who prioritize their particular type of or identity politics may promote their group's interests without regard for the interests or larger, more diverse political groups. Now, how does identity politics work? So let me give you some examples, and then I'll talk a little bit about the root of it and how it's been used to manipulate African Americans. So, for instance, Barack Obama won. He ran as president, and he won. 90+% of the people that are African Americans voted for him, and they had been voting Democrat for some time at that point. So a lot of people will say, "Yeah, I voted for him because he was black," right? And if you didn't vote for him because he was black, then somehow or another you were not aware, or you were not woke, or something like that, right? That's how identity politics works, because it's this idea that because he's black and I'm black, then I naturally need to vote for him. Hillary Clinton, it was a very similar dynamic. There was a lot of people that wanted to vote for her because they said that it's time for us to have a woman president. That's identity politics, because it associates a group with some sort of a monolithic mindset that says that if you're in this group, this is how you should vote, or this is who you should vote for. Now, the reason that I think it's so important for us to understand from the African American perspective is because African Americans were Republicans many generations ago. As a matter of fact, the Republican Party was the anti-slavery party, and as the anti-slavery party, it was actually formed and created to abolish slavery. Now, how that became very important is because the election of Ulysses S. Grant, which was soon after black people got the right to vote, Ulysses S. Grant won by 300,000 votes. At the time, 500,000 African Americans voted, African American males, of course, and so they understood that the African American vote put Ulysses S. Grant over the top, right? So at that point, moving forward, there was this a very directed strategy in trying to hinder black people from voting. So you had voter suppression, you had different things like that. You had Jim Crow laws that created many difficulties for black people to vote. But then what happened is when you had the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s that guaranteed black people the right to vote, then the powers that be began to use this groupthink mentality in order to get black people to vote for the same candidate. So there was a switch that happened in the 1960s where a lot of black people switched from Republican to Democrat. And how did that happen? So it primarily happened. I'm friends with Dr. Alveda King, and she told me a story of how when Richard Nixon was running against JFK, and Martin Luther King Jr. was put in prison in Alabama. And you guys may know the history of race relations in the South. Especially in Alabama, a lot of civil rights activists were actually murdered because they were fighting for equal rights for African Americans. So Martin Luther King Jr. is in prison in Alabama. And so Martin Luther King's father went to Richard Nixon and he went to JFK, who were both running for office. And he asked them to intercede. He says, I'm afraid they're going to kill my son. And so Richard Nixon didn't respond at all. He didn't want to touch the issue. JFK wrote a letter to the governor of Alabama asking him to make sure or guarantee the safety of MLK Jr. So because of that, Martin Luther King and the civil rights leaders supported JFK, right? And a lot of people voted for JFK, a lot of African Americans, and of course, obviously, JFK won the election. So what happened was that it gave the impression that Democrats were now the party of civil rights, which before that, it was the Republican Party, because from the time of its inception until the 1960s, the Republican Party was considered to be the party of civil rights, right? Because they were founded as the anti-slavery party. Now, an interesting thing happened. You have LBJ now after Kennedy is assassinated. Kennedy is assassinated. LBJ becomes the president. LBJ supports the Civil Rights Bill, 1964 Civil Rights Act. Now, it was curious for him to do that because of the fact that before that, LBJ was a known racist. He used the N-word quite often. I actually have from the presidential archives a conversation that LBJ had where he actually used the N-word. He flew it around pretty freely because he was what was known as a Southern Dixiecrat. So the Democrats were considered the racists in the South, the Dixiecrats, they called them, the Southern Dixiecrats, and that's what LBJ was. In his unauthorized biography, the biographer and other people said that it was well known that LBJ was a racist and he used the N-word frequently, right? So now he supports the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And so people that knew him and his political supporters asked him, why did he do a 180-degree turn, which previously he had voted against the Civil Rights Act or didn't support it. So LBJ understood that now that black people were getting the right to vote, that they needed to use the black vote to gain political power because black people represented the swing vote back then. As I told you, one of the first elections after black people were given the right to vote, Ulysses S. Grant in the 1800s, he won by 300,000 votes and 500,000, he was a Republican, 500,000 African Americans voted for Ulysses S. Grant, which means if you take away those 500,000 votes, Ulysses S. Grant loses the election. So they understood the power of the black vote as the swing vote, right? And so the reason that's important, again, as I said, for the most part, the country was split. White people were split between Republicans and Democrats. It was usually pretty even on both sides, right? So they began to tap into that. So what did LBJ do? LBJ did not support the civil rights movement, but he realized that it was inevitable that it was going to get passed. And so what he did is he supported the Civil Rights Act, and he implemented what was known as the War on Poverty. So they created the welfare system. LBJ was the founder of the Great Society, which was socialism. It was a socialist. He was a socialist. And so he created the welfare system as a way not to empower black people to get out of their situation, because welfare was set up as a temporary fix for people that were in financial straits to help them take care of their needs. But he didn't set it up as a way to, in order to empower the black community, because socialism's ultimate goal is not to empower individuals, but to get people dependent on the government. And that is the founders of socialism. That was their ideas, that they were going to create a system to get the people dependent on the government, and with the promise, or with the sense that they were there to help the people out. Communism is the same way. So LBJ's famous quote in his unauthorized biography was written. He was alleged to have said, they asked him, why did he make a 180-degree turn and support the Civil Rights Bill? He said that black people, and I'm using the nice terms, he didn't use black people. He said the Negro has now become uppity because they have rights. And I'm paraphrasing. He said, but for the first time in history, they have something to go along with that uppityness, which is the right to vote. They have political power. He said, so we have to give them something, not enough to make a difference, but enough to make them think that we care. And we will have, and famously he quoted, those N-words voting Democrat for the next 200 years. So his idea was, because black people represented the swing vote, that they created a system, the welfare system, as a way in social programs to give the impression that they cared about black folks. And so because of that, it has garnered black loyalty to the Democratic Party. And so since the 60s till now, black people have overwhelmingly become Democrats. And I know that firsthand, because since 1985, when I registered for the Selective Service, I turned 18, I registered to vote. I registered as a Democrat because I knew that black people were Democrats. And from 1985 to 2012, I was a registered Democrat. In 2004, I worked on the John Kerry presidential campaign because I was a loyal Democrat. But what happened to me, because I started to look beyond identity politics, because I realized that for 50 years, black people were voting for the same political parties, but our problems remained the same in the inner cities. Also, when I started to look at the fact that most inner cities, most urban areas that have large concentrations of black people have all the same issues, whether it's Philadelphia, whether it's Chicago, whether it's Baltimore, whether it's Detroit, whether it's Los Angeles, Houston. I could go on and on, that these large urban areas that have black people have the same problems. So you have high crime rates, high fatherlessness in the community, high incarceration rates among black people and black males in particular, high drug and high crime. In all of those areas, you have those same statistics, and they are all run by Democrats, because it's the same system that is put in place. So we've been voting for Democrats, and some of those cities have been Democrat for 50 or 60 years. I think the last Democratic mayor in Chicago, maybe in the 1940s or something like that. I could be wrong, but I know they've been Democratic cities for a long time. So I say all that to say that because of this groupthink, we have, and with identity politics, that has been, we have been socially engineered as black people, that we consistently vote for Democratic candidates because we believe that that's what we're supposed to do as black people. We identify our race with a political party. And the reason that I switched, because after 2004, I really started to study the political realm. I started to study politics, and I started to look at it from a platform issue base instead of identity politics. And I started to realize an interesting thing, that black people by nature have been conservative for generations. What do I mean by that? I was always taught that you had to get an education in order to succeed in life. I was always taught family values. We went to church as a community. We believed in hard work and earning what you got, right? Those are all conservative values. And we held those values even though we began to vote for liberals and people that held to liberal values, even though we all held conservative values. And so as I began to look at it, especially as a pastor and as a Christian, and I recognized that the Bible is very clear that marriage should be between a man and a woman, and that you should honor and preserve human life at all costs in every stage. These are principles that we have held in our community for a long time. So how is it that we get to a place through identity politics that we begin to support political candidates that don't hold our values? They run on platforms that actually go against our very values, but because of identity politics, we believe that if we're black, we're supposed to vote Democrat. Right? That has been the thing. And a lot of black people will argue with you and they'll say, no, I don't believe that. But when you start to drill down to issues, most of them believe in conservative values. Most of them aren't liberal or haven't been liberal. Recently, there's been a switch, but ultimately now, there's been a change. And the last point I want to make to you, as I quoted Malcolm X and how powerful the media is. The media is even more powerful than ever because the media is the people that help to perpetuate identity politics and groupthink mentality. And so they use celebrities, they use singers and actors and different things from our community. And they will promote this idea of groupthink that says that if you're black, you had to have been for Barack Obama and you have to be against Donald Trump. That just goes with the territory. And if you go against that agenda, those talking points, that narrative, somehow or another, you're either a sellout, you're not woke or something like that. But that is all part of identity politics, and they use the media to reinforce those ideas. And so we have this thing called the illusion of choice, because you have to understand that the bigger problem for us as black people, and even as for society as a whole, is not racism, but it is globalism. It's this idea that people want a one world governmental system, and it's the ruling elite that's at the very top that will control that, right? So no matter who wins as the president, if I'm a multimillionaire, those things really don't affect me either way. Social programs are for the middle class and for the lower classes, right? And so this whole idea about social classes is something that is used to manipulate the middle and the lower classes. And so here's how powerful the media is. There's a thing called the illusion of choice. The illusion of choice is a psychological mental model that states that humans are happy if they believe that they have control over their own actions and can exercise free will. So the illusion of choice is that the media and the powers that be manipulate you to a certain degree that you believe that you're making choices based on your own ideas, but ultimately you have been manipulated into thinking that way. Now, groupthink is a the illusion of choice is important to understand because the media is not biased. The media is not biased. As a matter of fact, 6 companies own 90% of all the media that you get. I'm going to say that again. 6 companies own all the media that you get. It used to be General Electric that owned NBC, but they no longer do. It's just Comcast now. So you have Comcast, you have Time Warner, you have you have CNN, you have these 6 companies that own 90% of all of the media. And because of that, you really are not getting a choice. You don't get a choice, even though you think you do, because the media is pushing an agenda, and that agenda basically gives you your opinion subconsciously, even with you, and you may not understand, and you don't understand it. It's so important, and I'm gonna get those 6 companies for you. I had it in my notes, and but it's important for us to understand that. It's important for us to understand the fact that in this day and age, that most of the things that we're getting, most of the information we're getting comes from these channels. So you have the 6s. Comcast is one. You have News Corp. You have the Disney Company, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. So CBS owns Showtime, the Smithsonian Channel, NFL Networks, Jeopardy, and 60 Minutes. Time Warner owns CNN, HBO, Time, of course, and Warner Brothers Studios. Viacom owns MTV, BET, Nickelodeon, CM Country Music Television, and Paramount Pictures. The Disney Channel owns ABC, ESPN, Pixar, Miramax, Marvel Studios, and now they also have bought the news, Fox News. They bought the news division of Fox. News Corp owns Wall Street Journal, New York Post, and also they own Fox, but the Fox News is owned by Disney. And then, of course, you have Comcast, which owns NBC, Universal Pictures, and Focus Features. So when you're getting this news, you're not getting an unbiased opinion. You're getting the globalist opinion that is able to manipulate and control us. And so we have to get out of this groupthink. We have to begin to drill down and look at issues over identity, right? And they're going to do it again because this new election cycle, mark my words, Joe Biden, who's running for the Democratic office, he's going to most likely pick a woman and maybe a black woman. So what does that do? The black community will say, we have to vote for this person because they're black. And women will say, we're going to vote for this person. Well, not just women, but people will say it's time for a woman to be in office, right? So I don't have a problem with women, black people, white people, anybody, Hispanic people, but we can't vote based on identity. That is a tool of manipulation that keeps us bound and also keeps us from understanding true political power and how we advance as individuals and as groups. This has been Dr. Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul's Missionary Baptist Church, also the founder of the 2019 movement. And until next time, peace and blessings to you.